Hey, Ed Socia here, back again with datacenterHawk's senior analyst Montana Myer for episode 4 of our North American Regional Podcast. We're here for a quick one today to discuss the importance of understanding data when making decisions in the data center space. So, when I think about the market or communicating market activities, I like to, or we like to focus on sort of 4 chunks, and that is the supply, the demand, the pricing, and the trends that are taking place. So, let's start with supply. When we're talking about supply, we're talking about data center power that is either planned, has been commissioned, or is being built out or is under construction. Now, this capacity will vary given the taxonomy of the data center requirements of the users of that data center. So, whether it be for a cloud availability zone or an AI, LLM deployment, or even an enterprise data center, all of these things require different strategic approaches from the development side. So, Montana, why don't you take us through some of the reasons why understanding a region's supply is paramount in understanding the health and trajectory of a market?
Yeah, understanding supply, I think, gives an indication as to what's competitive in the market. So, if you can see, hey, what's available and what's upcoming, that's going to help kind of show expectations of the market or, current demand. We don't, right now in the U.S., there's not necessarily a ton of available supply, but, if a market had a lot of available supply, that would indicate that there's not, significant demand. I also think you can look at it from a power perspective. Knowing if there's a sub-market that has a lot of planned power, as that gets built out, there's probably not a ton of power in that area that could be delivered just based on the transmission and distribution infrastructure. And so, it probably doesn't make sense if you're looking to go to that market to go, to that area because there's, just electrons on the power lines that's not going to be able to handle it. From a leasing perspective, understanding supply is probably important, especially if you're a broker looking at, you're trying to represent a tenant and they've, a 6 megawatt requirement. You're probably not going to find 6 megs available today, but knowing what's upcoming and some of those timelines are super valuable so that you can deploy that in the time that the tenant needs. And I think that right now we're in a very supply-constrained market, and that's ultimately because we've had a lot of demand. And so, as we talk about demand, I think that they are, we're seeing right now very directly related. Do you want to kind of dive into demand a little bit as well?
Sure, yeah, let's flip to demand. So I think it's important to understand, and sometimes when we say this stuff, I feel like we're telling people what they already know, but I know there's a lot of folks out there that are new to the data center space. So when we talk about demand, we use the term absorption, and when we use this term, we're essentially referring to the net leasing that's occurred in a market. This is also measured by the power usage of the data center operator and subsequently the data center user. So as you mentioned, Montana, right now, as it stands today, demand so far outpaces supply that it continues to affect a ton of variables related to data center development. And so to make an informed decision, you need to understand that supply-demand balance. And one thing I'll kind of kick us off with here is one thing I hear in my channel checks and speaking to providers all the time is, I'll hear that, maybe there's an emerging market, and I'll say, hey, are you guys interested in market A or market B or market C? And they will give us indications that they will only go to those markets if they have guidance or if they have indications from an end user, more often than not hyperscalers, that they want to be there. So a company might not build in Minneapolis unless a hyperscaler comes to them and says, hey, we want to be in Minneapolis. Now that's not, it's not black and white, and there's obviously, enterprise demand across the country, but what would you add to that, Montana?
Yeah, I think you hit on it a little bit. There is a, kind of a difference in some of this hyperscale demand versus enterprise demand. Part of the reason is because the hyperscale requirements are so big. And so I think those are talked about a lot more, but there is a lot of enterprise demand. And, a lot of times that's going to be in an existing data center market, whether that's a primary market like Northern Virginia, Dallas, Atlanta, or a secondary market like a market like Columbus. There's some enterprise demand. Des Moines, there some of these connectivity type plays, or where businesses are operating. Charlotte, you have all this financial stuff, different companies out there. There's those types of demands, and so being able to understand the demand of a market is very valuable. I just talking about some stats too. Demand in North America has increased. Last year it increased 64%, and that was on top of 82% the year before, and the year prior, 2022, it increased 127%. So demand is very high right now. To your point, it's very much outpacing supply. And I think as we continue to see increased demand, especially in major markets, that's also causing land prices to increase. And so it's resulting in the total cost of development, total cost of ownership of some of these data center developments to increase. And so that's why understanding those numbers even more, they're just more important, because you have to know that you're going to be able to back up your investment and ultimately get a lease done on that space.
That's great, Montana. I know that the sort of ebbs and flows of that total cost of ownership, and currently we're seeing it increase, is really important information for folks on the investment side to have, especially when underwriting data center projects. Let's talk about, and we've referenced this a little bit, but this supply-demand imbalance, again, basic economics, this is going to, when you have a market like we do today, that demand so far outpaces supply, we have these super low vacancy rates across the board. What is our blended average vacancy rate across North America right now, Montana? Estimated?
I believe it's sub 3%.
Sub 3%. And then in primary, tier one markets, where some of these markets are sub 1%. So when we think about this demand far outpacing supply, this is going to create upward pricing momentum on these asking rates. And this also, all of this stuff rolls into being thoughtful in how you deploy these data centers. So, one, to talk about the supply-demand imbalance, folks who signed a lease in a market, in a primary market 7-8 years ago, that might have gotten, maybe it was a modified gross deal and their asking rate was, $75 modified gross plus the cost of electric. They come back for their renewal today and they see that market is now somewhere between $130 and $150 per kW per month modified gross. And, those changes plus the ever-changing, cost of electricity, a very small change in that compounded over a several hundred megawatt data center can be millions of dollars in a delta.
Yeah, and that's going to, as people look at evaluating these markets, they're putting in some of those numbers, like expected pricing numbers, and that really does influence whether they can make the numbers work or not for a new site. I think we've seen the late 2010s pricing was continuing to go down. But as demand rapidly increased, supply couldn't keep up, and that's why we've seen pricing really increase over the last 3 years. Do you want to elaborate on why understanding pricing for a specific market matters? Why is that valuable?
Sure. Yeah, that's a good question. I think it's when we look at certain markets maybe that have slowed down, or said differently, what we've heard in our channel checks, focusing on specific markets, when let's take Toronto for instance. We're hearing that it's getting a bit more difficult to develop in Toronto because of the build costs, labor costs, things like that, and then that cost of electricity as well. So if you are a provider and you have your margins in mind that you've historically gotten working with an end user, knowing how that pricing is moving, whether it's up or down, and how that's going to directly affect your margins is really important in knowing whether or not you even want to take on a project.
Yeah, because sometimes the tenant may not want to pay $200 per kW per month plus the cost
Yeah.
of electric. And so, yeah, knowing what you need to hit in order to make the investment worth it is very important.
That's right.
I think the other side of that is like getting pricing wrong if you're doing a deal is dangerous because
Yeah.
you're losing out on probably a lot of money potentially. And so, getting it right is a big deal.
Yeah.
And so knowing how pricing is changing on an annual basis is pretty important.
Yeah.
If I'm
Sorry.
go ahead.
I was gonna say, Montana, it's the other side of that coin is, so one is you want to know what your competition is doing because you don't want to leave money on the table at the end of the day when you're working with an end user. That said, that same information needs to be leveraged to remain competitive. If your competition is pricing you out of the market, it's going to be really difficult to convince some of those end users to deploy with you. And I think this is actually a great segue into our fourth chunk, which is trends, which is understanding more of the anecdotal, let's call it a 30,000 foot view of sort of some of the things that might affect geographical deployments. It might affect whether or not someone is going to do a shell deal, or based on the pricing commentary, we've seen a rise in yield on cost deals. And that's because the provider is able to set that yield, and no matter what ebbs and flows within reason, that yield is going to remain the same. So the trends piece kind of, I guess, brings in bits and pieces of all of this stuff. So one trend that I think has been really important to watch, or said differently, understand over the last, call it 12 months is, it's no surprise to anyone that power is the largest challenge facing the data center space. 5-6 years ago, we were hearing the acronym ESG thrown around a lot more. And I don't think these people or I don't think these companies are necessarily rescinding their ESG initiatives, but they're understanding that, hey, we can't possibly get to our target deployment, totals, multi gigawatt deployments with purely leveraging renewable energy. But again, coupling that with the fact that, hey, we still want to be sustainable, we still have, renewable portfolio standards, we need to weigh the cost of doing business while also meeting these renewable portfolio standard goals. And, so what has that sort of done for the market? That's opened up the conversation around nat gas, obviously the conversation around, nuclear energy and SMRs and things like that. I guess, what is another trend, Montana, that you would throw out to the listeners here that's something we're keeping our eyes on and something that's valuable to understand in thoughtfully developing your data centers?
Yeah, I think it's back on the supply side a little bit. It's where in some of these existing markets could I potentially expand, like a new submarket. We see development occur a lot of times in a hub spot, whether it's like Ashburn or Elk Grove Village in Chicago. And a lot of times we're going to start to see those go out to new spots because, there is land in some of these, further out regions, and you can, potentially speed up some of your timelines to delivery. I think that's a trend we're seeing. Another one would just be, I think you hit on it, but like nat gas, but on-site generation.
Yep.
Even if it's not nat gas, some people are starting to put, some like smaller solar deployments on site. And I think that has to be coupled with batteries as well. But having on-site generation is super helpful, I think, also for the utility to help speed up your delivery time or your ramp schedule. And so we're starting to hear more people discuss that as well. And that's gonna affect, if you're in a market like Phoenix, that's going to affect your design and your cost ultimately, because you're having to deploy more capital, but you can potentially bring on more capacity faster.
Yeah. And I think, again, this is why it's really important to have access to good data, to understand the conversations that are taking place, one between us and providers and end users, to understand sort of where the ball is heading, but Also to understand, you as a developer or you as an end user, if you've historically deployed in a market, are there shifting dynamics in that market relative to the municipality that are going to affect your build design or your strategy? Maybe you want to touch on that?
Yeah, totally. I mean, some municipalities are reaching the point where it's like, hey, data centers are great, but we are feeling an overwhelming presence. And that's like a real thing. We continue to see a little bit of community pushback. I think data centers are great ultimately for a community. They provide a great tax base. They are high-tech jobs. Most of these companies are ultimately wanting to benefit the community rather than take away. Their goal is not to come to a community and say, hey, we want all your power. They do want power, but that's not their goal. They're trying to ultimately invest in the community so that they can have the power to hopefully, improve their business as well. It's a mutual relationship. They're not just going to step in and, pull everything away. They want to contribute to ultimately have a, not codependent, but mutual benefiting relationship.
Yeah, they want to be good stewards of their community, which again, and this is the final trend I'll leave us with. We've talked about this a little bit in the past, but the workforce piece of some of these more remote data center deployments it's really complex. Like understanding, hey, okay, we have to figure out the intersection of power, fiber, the requirement of our end user, and where we can go and thoughtfully build. But then that the sort of the workforce labor side of things compounds this already complex issue, because if you're building in the middle of nowhere and you need, not even just on the construction side, but when you want very bright tech talent from, that more likely than not went to schools in, very dense metros and bustling cities, younger professionals want to live in areas where there are microbreweries and music and entertainment and other young folks that they can share community with. And I think this is a trend that we're starting to see now that is becoming a bit of a challenge, is not just the transportation to a remote build site, but also, what does it look like today versus 15 years from now? Is your data center bringing life to a town or a city? Or is it a master planned development that is going to have larger implications than just your AI training cluster? Is it going to, one, boost the economy of the region, but two, is it going to bring some new blood and some new life into those communities?
Yeah, because ultimately, as you bring in labor, you have to have the infrastructure to support that labor, and so there is bigger investment that has to be made outside of just the data center piece. Yeah,
agreed. Well, Montana, thank you so much again for joining me today. I think it's very clear that it's a very fast moving target, the data center space, and it's very complex, and there's several different ways to approach it, but all of those different strategies and methodologies require deal-back data. They require real, concrete data of what is going on out there in the market, where folks are actually building, stuff that is unfolding in real time. And we here at DatacenterHawk love to have these conversations. This is what we do day in and day out. We're gathering the supply, we're gathering the demand, we're talking about pricing. So Montana, thank you again for joining me. I'm Ed Socia with DatacenterHawk. We will see you on the next one.
See ya.